Okay, are we live? We've clicked the button. So are we live? It looks like we're being live. And it looks like we are live. So we are recording from Arlington, Vermont. This is Happy Valley Hobbies. My name is Mr. Katie, and these are hobbies that make me happy. Today, we are going with what we were finishing off last week, which is, doing this diorama for a trestle. And got that. All right. So here we are. Tonight we are going to do a little stuff on the diorama, adding a stream and also adding greenery. So we're outlining what I'm going to be doing. So let me change over to bench mode. All right. So my plan is tonight, say we outline where this trestle is going. Sort of like mock out this where the stream's going to be. This is sort of kind of going to be a little on the obvious side. There. It's going to be the front. Rear. It's going to be here. It'll be in between. It'll be in between this. This is where most of the black we're going to be doing is. One thing we are planning on doing is putting this Sister's matte craft for the base, and then for sort of like the green base, sort of like cover up a little bit, is Sister's craft in green. That way, and instead of mixing stuff up and all that, let's say we just turn around and be brave and let's go directly onto everything. Directly on. One thing I'm going to do, which is probably a little bit non-standard, was use a silicone brush. Do that as that. Now this is my first attempt of doing scenery, so as with all with first attempts, it's probably not going to be the greatest. Turn around and figure out what to do, what not to do. Sometimes there's things that you turn around and you assume that it's going to be okay, but then when you actually do it, winds up being not as pretty as you initially intended. But it's one of those things of this is how Master Model Railroad got started. They just started doing things and came out looking great. It did. It didn't. It didn't. So it's my slightly out of frame here. Let's see, move the camera just a little bit. Alright, now everything's in frame. Looks like we might have to more down. But sort of like a little bit like last stream is watching a little paint dry. That's unfortunately on the last stream you can't speed up. Technically, if I had a hairdryer, I might be able to, but it's starting to look really glossy. Now, my assumption is that since it says matte on the container, this is going to dry not glossy. But I have to say, in order to really find out, you're going to have to turn into next week after it's dry. But another thing is also to figure out how this YouTube thing works. Apparently, when I was first doing these, not sure if it was why it was a little bit more popular than it is now, first runs. But alright, that looks. Now another thing I want to do is take the bridge, sort of kind of figure out where the track is going to go. Now, the thing is, I'm planning on using Code 55 track, which seems to be easier to buy as N scale And then just take the rail off the end scale, ties, and go from. So see where this sort of lands. This might not be exactly where the ballast winds up going, but it does give a indication of where I don't need to put the green. Seems a little bit darker. See it. Not to where I know we're not. This ballpark where I should be. Now, let's say right about here. Because I don't need to paint. It's right here. This is probably going to be filled in with rocks. There. It doesn't have to be exact because murder scenery, turn around and cover up stuff. It'll give me a basic outline of where to add green. All right. Now let's say we add Tester's Craft matte green. More sort of do it along the lines of oops, I pulled it much, but that's okay. It's on the top. We can always bring it down. So that mostly cleaned up. Now this is more of a base layer. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. It's basically if any of the stuff that's on top falls off, and this is on here to sort of make it so it's not obviously not an obvious color. You know, like the white won't be shining through. Let's see, Joe Rader. Well, thank you for coming. Yeah, it's a lot easier to put water in or falls and stuff like that before you actually put the structures in. Sort of like the opposite of what real stuff is. So I'm not planning on going right to the wall. Close to close as possible, but not necessarily on top. One of the larger things that a lot of uh, not only model railroads, but people who do scenery or landscape paintings, they do suggest that you go out in the wild and take reference photos to see about what would make sense for uh, what you were doing. And I also get the impression of doing things in layers, and make each successful layer nicer looking. But as I said earlier in this earlier today, this is my first time doing scenery, so there's a good chance that this might look more better on a lino layout than a scale one. Let's see the line scale here. I want to get to this. What I'm using now is a silicone brush instead of your normal bristle brush. My guess is, since this is not uh, since this is not going to be a fine coating, doesn't really matter how rough it is. If you look at this real closely, you can obviously see a lot of the brush strokes. Because most of this is going to be underneath stuff. So you're not gonna really see a lot. And this is why another reason why I'm sort of like painting it directly, throwing the paint directly on there. Because that's I'm not aiming for detail at this point. So it's sort of like really fuzzy at this point. If anyone has eyeglasses and they take their eyeglasses off, this is sort of what the detail level I'm aiming for, being very blurry, not being very detailed. It's when getting the excuse me, the layers on top where things are going to be more and more detailed, and then you get more and more concerned on what's the right way of doing it. Like this here is like going to be covered in ballast, trees, static grass. So this is basically going to be underneath. So if something falls off, then it's not a glaringly white, because underneath this is plaster. You can actually see right here where some of the stuff has come out. Absolutely, Curator. I completely agree with you. And that's why when you're doing your first layers, they can look the ugliest because, well, the layers on top are going to be, they're going to be covering covering over the, well, I wouldn't say ugliness, but the less detailed. Right now, I'm thinking that this green that I picked up in the bargain bin is a little bit too bright, but things will be eventually covered over with darker stuff. So that's what the current plan is being set up as. This is also the practice before I actually start putting stuff on my layout, which is this part right here, which I have to like repaint a little bit to. I painted one side with primer, the other side with the same brown I did these, or did the diorama. But when I put everything back to, when I put it back all together, obviously some of the primer is showing through, as shown through. So basically going back to have to go back and repaint it. Oh, hello, Boxcar. Boxcar Jerry, how are you doing this evening? Doing my best to, well, hopefully entertain. Sort of they call it edutainment or whatever it is. But yeah, right now this is sort of my first serious delving into doing scenery. It's a diorama for a. I bought this trestle kit, put it together. It's from Hunterline, and then happened to realize that there's no way I'm putting it on my layout because my layout doesn't have a ravine. So I'm using this not only to have a spot for the trestle, but also something to practice on. And that's when sometimes you have to do things for the practice of it instead of hoping that you get it done right first time on your layout. But doing a diorama, you can turn around and you can make you can make a mistake and all that, and then keep on building dioramas until you feel comfortable enough to put it on your final layout. And that's what, and you also find out what techniques work, what doesn't work. Also, my layout right now, it's only 8 foot long, 4 or 18 inches wide, and did not design it to have any water features. So this is another thing, is to practice on doing things that you don't have on your layout yet, or plan to. The layout I have is actually a it's not the final layout, but I am you know, practicing dioramas, and it's one of those things you probably will never get a last layout. Well, hello, Anthony. How you doing? Thank you for coming in, everyone who's been not only watching but also ones that have been talking in the chat. Makes me feel like I'm not just talking to myself, but I am slowly trying to learn this YouTube thing. I would have to say that is, YouTube is not the hobby. It's to share. It's to share the hobbies that make me happy. And but again, it is one of those things of learning on how to do things better and better, and going from there. This looks like a decent first coat. Got a thing of water here, slightly off camera, so I can clean it, clean the brush. Cleaning brushes is always a good thing. This is my first time actually using a silicone brush. You clean it off, and most of the paint is gone. My understanding, the paint will not adhere to the silicone, but we'll find out if it doesn't. Well, actually, I don't usually talk too much, especially by myself, because it's, to me, it's, what's the point of talking if there's no one to talk to? So usually it's, a lot of it's in my head. Now, I would have to say it is a lot easier to talk to yourself when you know that there's people there to listen. But for what I am planning for the water itself, once this all dries, using basically a very thick layer of Mod Podge, and doing it best, make waves and stuff like that. But I am in the process of the trestle that this is for is a hunter line trestle. They have two variations. I got the I got the oh, I forgot what they called it. There's a post one, and then there's I think this is the beam one. Posts are round, the beam is they're square. They did a Nutrax modeling, did a build along, and I built the post version. I think it came out decent. Got all the small little nut and bolt washer castings. Those were a little bit of a pain to do. And sometimes it's one of those things of, sometimes how much detail do you go down to? I mean, I know one time I did a locomotive, I did every single detail you could think of and all that. But the thing is that the Delaware and Hudson RS3, and the thing is that during the transition time, they had basically it was a black locomotive with yellow stripes in the end, and so the railings done in yellow. And when I painted all the small little lift rings, the added nut and bolt and washer castings, everything sort of kind of disappeared, except for there was one detail that was for the brake rigging that is missing on every single RS3 model that's out there. And it was after I had everything all painted and all that. I should have said I should have just only went with the brake detail. So that was the only thing that was large enough that you could actually notice on a black paint scheme. Actually, I want to say even the little lift rings that were on the locomotive, even if you painted it white, you could barely see them. And I would have to. I'm not sure if it's my camera or what, but um, the paint that's on here in real life looks less blue than it does on the camera. Camera makes it looks almost turquoise, but I can be completely wrong on that. But well, it is what it is. I mean, each camera is slightly different, and cameras are different, monitors are different. You know, there's a lot of things that can change between real life and what goes on the internet. Now it looks like this right here. Of course, it's slightly out of the camera. So without touching that. All right, right about here, you can just see where it's starting to dry, and it is drying. It is drying matte. So that I think is going to be good on that part. I think that's all I can do with the model right now. I am in the process of buying. Thing is that I have built. This is the 50-foot clean post bridge. That's actually on my other diorama, and it's also from Hunterline. They are in the process of showing how to build the covered bridge version of this. At first, I thought it was very odd that the covered bridge didn't have these diagonal braces. Then I just happened to realize that the diagonal braces, instead of being out here on a covered bridge, would be probably inside in the covered version. So that's why it's sort of kind of flat, which that makes sense. But I am planning on doing I'm buying and doing the cover bridge version of this, which is a little bit taller. It's the same width. The interesting thing is it actually says in the instructions, it actually showing the two different versions. You know, you got I got the 16-foot clearance, and they also have what they call the narrow gauge, which is 14-foot clearance. Now, here's the funny thing is that the 14-foot clearance, that is the prototype size, but they have it as narrow gauge because the NMRA, they would go with the 16-foot clearance because the NMRA uses, they assume that there's going to be, the tracks are going to be narrow, have tighter radiuses. So in order to do the tighter radius, you have to have wider clearances. So yeah, I just happened to notice that I did something silly here, but as I said, that this is sort of like the primer, the under base of everything, and then gonna see about doing one of the interesting things is doing static grass. mainly because I wound up last year the flies were a little bit too much and got really annoying, and so I bought one of those electric fly swatters. They had they were effective on flies. They weren't so much on the small little black gnats and all that, which was really annoying. But apparently, a lot of people have taken those and made their own static grass applicators with them, and so that's what I'm thinking of doing. And I also get the impression that they're not very uh, not they work, but they're not as powerful as a commercial version. And then they got commercial versions that are, when they say the warnings of, this is high voltage and can be deadly, it's not the voltage that actually kills you, it's the amperage. But the higher voltage does make it so amperage can be high enough to kill you. So it is one of those things that if I'm planning on doing it, but at the same time, I recommend people if you unless you know what you're doing, you probably should not be doing. I went to ITT Tech for electronics and to be an electronics technician, so I understand why what things do and all that. And that's sort of my other hobby that I will be eventually be talking about on this channel is electronics, because uh, electronics and trains do well. Electronics and everything usually had a tendency to go together, but how I got into electronics was, in order to making sure that the trains go, you had to have some basic knowledge of electricity, and that's how I sort of kind of got into uh, got into that direction. Um, Getting into electricity, that also got me into um, computers, robotics. It's sort of like it was a gateway drug into anything, because model railroading, you're making your own little world that you can control and sort of be able to play God. And I think that might be what the appeal is with model trains and all that, because you are I mean, there's some rules you can't change, like gravity, uh, and how electricity works, and etc. But everything else is, the aesthetics is all up to you. Uh, I know when Anthony, when he does a live stream and all that, his rare is pretty basic. I mean, it's mostly just loops, uh, which some people have that as an appeal. Some people like the operations. I sort of like. I would like seeing trains going round and round and all that, but unfortunately, I do not have that capacity to do so. So I have to go with operations. But ooh, I just realized something. I gotta change my itinerary calendar. That was for February. That was January's. Now we are into March. And that has looks like it has a couple of very powerful steam engines. So I haven't found a good place to put it. So right now the calendar is uh, basically folded over on my backdrop layout, which The camera is not pointed at this point in time. But that looks like it's not going to want to stay to get the paper clips. I have lots of paper clips because they make very handy clamps. And I got different size, got all different size of not paper clips, clothesline pins. Got everything to the normal size clothespin. The craft store, you can get these smaller ones. And in some places, you might even get really itty bitty clothespins. They're usually not the great. These at this size, they're not the greatest, but I think they're more for decoration at this point. One thing that is for decoration is going the other direction and going large. These are not what you want to call very. I think the springs on this is actually, yeah, that's the spring on that is much stronger than on this one. But this one you can turn around and clamp on much larger sizes. But for calendar, probably be best if we go this size. So we go grab this. This would probably pick up a little more appropriate, but I don't really difference. All right. Now, one interesting thing that you can do with clothespins, especially the spring style, is that you can flip them around and you have a different kind of different style of clamp. This unfortunately, because the weak spring, makes this a little bit weaker also, but you have a much deeper throat than you do with this one. And it's easy to do. It's easy to pull them out and go that direction. But right now, we're just letting paint dry. Let me change over to all right, let's change cameras. Where? Cursor is found. Yes. We are back to the normal spot. And it looks like I've gotten messy. Oh well. Because, well, sometimes model railroading is, fun, but doesn't necessarily mean it's clean also. I'm assuming somebody who's even though some of them show that they're, the really professional ones, show that, they're able to do stuff with white gloves and all that. I'm assuming they're going through a lot going through a lot of white gloves just to give the illusion that you don't get dirty. because I know when it comes to model trains, no matter what the scale, you get, especially when it comes to scenery, you wind up getting dirty. Um, Especially uh, with the inch and a half scale stuff. I was a member for a short time with the Anorak Live Steamers, and there, when you're putting track together and all that, you're working on a railroad. It's like you're shoveling and ballasting and tamping, and just like they do on the railroad, except that you're just doing it in 7.25 inches instead of eight. Yeah, 4 foot 8.5 inches. Yeah. As far as I know, I want to say I don't remember an 8 foot gauge railroad, but I think the largest quote unquote gauged railroad was, let's say 28 or something. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records somewhere. So, and it was a one-off thing. I'm not quite sure if it was for some reason I'm thinking it had to do something with the sea. It was either the daddy long legs in Britain, or it had to do with a boat carrier, or it carried a boat uh, from one lake to another over a hill. Uh, Something along those lines, where it was very specialized, didn't go that long. I think 7.25 feet, which was the gauge of the Great Western that Brunel made. I think that was the largest, that was the broadest uh, of the common carrier gauges. And I think the smallest, I want to say, is 2 foot. That was popular up in Maine, and also for some reason I'm thinking in India that there's still a common carrier railway that is 2 foot gauge. I think there's a lot of sugarcane railways in Australia, which I think is it's either 2 foot or 600 millimeter, depending on which system you're going with. Yeah, it's very interesting. That quote standard gauge is 4 foot 8.5 inches. From my understanding, and how that became, was the first mine that, I think it was George Stevenson or Robert Stevenson, I forgot which one. It was the father that, or was it the son? I'm completely forgetting what is which. There is a series of that's made with the Spotlight series, and the guy goes and is always talking about the early days of railroading in Britain, and that seems very, very interesting at times. Every now and then he'll go off onto other countries. I know he did the South Carolina, which is considered the world's first articulated locomotive, which, it's one of those things of it looks from the side view, it looks like a Fairley, which was popular with smaller railroads. but it's not when you because the Fairley has like a central firebox and then has two boiler ends and two smokestacks, and then it has like a, well, they call it a bogie. We would the Americans would call it a truck that would be fully powered. Um, and the thing is that a lot of them had the problem with articulated joints, which they did not perfect for a while. Then there's another articulated locomotive, is the Garrett, which the way that operates is, I want to say, take the bogies of the Fairley, add on actual, uh, a front truck and a rear truck, and make them long enough, and then basically set the boiler on between them. So you wind up with water, coal and water tank, coal in the back, water tanks in the front and rear. So it looks to Americans, it looks very odd because they never made it in the United States. Then there was the least well known was I forgot exactly what it was, but it's a cross between the Garrett and the Farley. It has single straight boiler, and it had power bogies like a Farley, but it had like your normal boiler that you would have on top of them. And this, if I remember correctly, the cylinders were pointed on the inside. It also started with an M, but it wasn't a mallet. I forgot what it was, but they were the least popular out of the articulated locomotives. Then I think it was the Fairley, then it was the Garrett, and then there was the Mallet. The Mallet being it had one engine that was rigid onto the frame like a normal locomotive, but they extended boiler, and then they had a second truck out front that did the articulation. Initially, they had it so it would go forward and up and down, but then they finally got a big enough coupler between the front engine and the rear engine that there was no side play. But from what I understand, a true mallet is actually a compound because they had the high pressure cylinders on the fixed end, and then they would connect to the front engine, which would be the low cylinder ones. That's what I've heard as a true mallet. The ones that wound up being what's called a simple mallet are not considered a true mallet because they're not compounded. And that's what the Challengers and the big boys are. I think what they're called is a simple mallet, not a true mallet. But it is now 7:57. So it is time for, I forgot who is for tonight on Third Rail Thursday. Forgot who's actually in charge, but they are pretty much next. And so I'll be ending this stream soon, or might as well end it now. It's only about 3 minutes to go. But world needs more love, so find your passion, add some silliness to it, and spread it all over the place.